Welcome to the Breaking News Bears podcast. I'm your host, Chris Capone, joined alongside my co-host once again, Evan Davis, and there is a lot to discuss regarding MLB free agency, including an article that recently came out from Bleacher Report discussing the contracts and landing spot predictions for free agency's top 25 players. We'll go over that and discuss our opinion on that, along with who we believe the first domino to fall will be to set free agency ablaze and have everyone start signing to teams all across MLB, along with our thoughts on who we believe a surprise could be in the offseason and make some moves that really propel their trajectory ahead of schedule. Evan, I'll send it off to you. Who was one name in the article that you really found interesting?
I think one name in the article that I really found interesting in terms of even the team that looking like now thinking about it makes sense is Jock Peterson of the Kansas City Royals because we were talking about like doing the recap of that Yankees Royals series. It's like, the Royals have Bobby Witt Jr., they have Vinny Pasquantino. Salvador Perez obviously was phenomenal, but he's not getting any younger. Not to say that Jock Peterson is some young buck as well, but you need another power bat in that lineup. And they had Jock Peterson on a 2-year, $28 million deal. And I think that is a phenomenal contract. You look at his 2024 season, 23 homers, 64 RBIs, and 908 OPS. He played sparingly. Now, the one thing that might hold the Royals back is the fact that Jock Peterson is a DH. Sometimes you want Salvador Perez as your DH. Obviously, Salvi isn't going to be playing every day, regardless of if he's a DH or a catcher. But you want that DH spot at least to be fluid. And with Peterson, it's not going to be fluid. So you run the risk of that. But nonetheless, you get a power bat in your lineup that had a 515 slug. And I think this is a guy that will absolutely bolster at that four hole for the Royals.
Yeah, no, that was like you said, it was something that we were talking about that the Royals really need some more depth in their lineup where they have, basically once you get past that top four, it's like who else is really going to hit for this team? So yeah, I think Jock Peterson would be a really interesting addition for them to kind of fill that DH role most of the time. One of the players that I thought was a really interesting move was Nathan Eovaldi to the Nationals. Now, we talked about it, I think maybe 2 episodes ago, where the Nationals have a really big shot to, really propel their trajectory ahead of schedule this upcoming year. And we talk about it where one of their weaknesses is kind of that rotation spot where
Hmm.
uh obviously Patrick Corbin's going to be off the team after this year, after that
Hmm.
big extension they'd given him after 2019.
Cool.
And now you have a spot open in your rotation where Nathan Eovaldi has been such a steady piece for many teams throughout the last decade, and
Hmm.
now he'd be such a perfect addition. And what Bleacher Report has him as is a 2 years, $39 million deal, and I
Hmm.
believe that's kind of a steal for Nathan Eovaldi. I feel like that's going to be the rate at which he goes for. This past year had a 3.80 ERA. Last year in the postseason was huge for the Texas Rangers and really was their ace in that postseason and really meant a lot for them. Obviously, with the amount of injuries they had with Scherzer not being able to pitch full time in the postseason and DeGrom being out for the whole postseason and second half of the season last year. But yeah, getting Nathan Eovaldi would be kind of putting the Nationals ahead of schedule, I believe, just where, you know, it would be such a good fit for them, as I said, with that rotation spot opening up. And they have a
Hmm.
young rotation around around him with DJ Hers. Uh, you have Jake Irvin, who was okay this year. He's 27. Mackenzie Gore, obviously that current ace for the Nationals right now. Mitchell Parker as well. I think adding Nathan Eovaldi would be a really solid piece to that Nationals rotation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, one of the main things that we had said those last couple episodes ago was the fact that like Mackenzie Gore is a phenomenal pitcher. I think the future is bright for him. You look at DJ Hers as well, two guys that really stepped up. You had Mitchell Parker have his moments, but then again, like all these guys are like 23, 24 years old. You're not expecting them to be these superb pitchers this
They're
early,
all
but
lefties.
yeah, and the problem is like, yeah, they're also all lefties. You need right-handed pitching. Nathan Eovaldi, I think, would also just be a nice veteran presence to have. Like he's a champion, he's a winner. I think he would be great. Obviously, the Nationals have righties that are coming up within their system, so I think they're kind of like we don't want to spend all this money when we're still trying, like, there's still a development team. I look at another pitcher on this Bleacher Report list, and it's the, Dodgers ace, if you will, Jack Flaherty, and they have him on a 3-year, $60 million deal going to the Atlanta Braves. And I wonder, like, how does that, and it has an opt out after that first year. And look, I love Jack Flaherty, but you could tell that arm was just, it was falling off towards the end of the year. And that's fair. You're pitching a lot of innings. You're deep into the season, World Series, obviously, but you could tell even like in his end starts of the in the regular season, the velo was kind of ticking down. His ERA across 5 playoff starts wasn't the best, per se. And he's got a really nice pitch arsenal. The problem is like when he's off, like there's just no rebounding. It's just like you saw it in the Mets game in game 5 of the NLDS, where it's like after that first inning, you kind of were just like, you knew where it was going. Whereas, like with a guy like Yamamoto, for instance, after that first inning against the Padres in game 5 of the NLDS, he slowly but surely got back into it. Even after he gave up the home run to Juan Soto, he retired the next 13 batters or 11 batters in a row. The problem with Flaherty is like when he's on, he's on. When he's not, he's not. And although he is only 29 years old, you saw how he ended last year with the Baltimore Orioles. It's why he only got a 1-year deal. The Dodgers were lucky enough to win game 5 after he only got the team 4 outs. I don't know if he gets another 1-year deal. I really don't know what his market looks like because it's so hard to determine, is he a $25 million pitcher or is he the $14 million pitcher that the Tigers signed last offseason?
Yeah, and another thing really interesting about the article is they have Max Fried going to the Orioles now.
And he's going to the
Uh,
Dodgers.
a 6-year, $168 million deal. And, as you said, we've discussed him going to the Dodgers, and it just seems like
He is, he
it's
is.
such a clear path for him to go to the Dodgers, especially if Flaherty were to leave. Um, it just makes all too much sense. But one other pitcher that I thought was really interesting is Blake Snell going to the Boston Red Sox with a 5-year, $158 million
Oh,
deal. I don't really see Blake Snell getting, you know, that long of a contract for that much money. I'm sure that's what Scott Boras wants. I'm sure Scott Boras wants his client getting 30 million
yeah.
a year, but I don't see a world where, Blake Snell is a second half merchant and we discuss it where like
He's the greatest second half pitcher of all time, or at
yeah.
least of this era, like of this generation of baseball.
Yeah, and we discuss it where I don't know if teams are really willing to give a pitcher that much money where especially for that long of a tenure where he's going to be pitching the first half of your games, he's probably gonna have around near a 6 ERA, and then but in the second half, he's gonna have it down to like a 1.5 to 2 range. And it's like, it evens out at 3. But it's like Blake Snell has been so wishy-washy over the last couple of years. He won the Cy Young uh the year before this, where he led the majors in walks. Like
Yeah.
he's not he's so volatile that you
Mhm.
never know what you're gonna get from him.
And also, he's turning 32 on December 4th. Like, so you're telling me, and I, I really, maybe I'm missing something, but what is the media's obsession with thinking like the Boston Red Sox are going to be this heavy spending team? Because for whatever reason, like the last 2 off seasons now, everyone's saying that the Red Sox are going to be this aggressive team. And it's like you signed Tyler O'Neill to like a 1 year, you traded for Tyler O'Neill, like okay, great, like he strikes out 30% of the time. He's like a Costco Teoscar Hernandez. You struck out on Teoscar Hernandez, so that's why you went for Tyler O'Neill. And then you didn't get Blake Snell last offseason. You didn't get Teoscar last offseason. Now they're talking about the Red Sox want to get Teoscar, which means you have to give up a draft pick based on like because the Dodgers now gave Teoscar the qualifying offer. And I don't get the media's obsession. Like the Red Sox aren't a pitcher away or a hitter away from being better than the Yankees or the Orioles. I know the Yankees have so many free agents, but you can't tell me that they aren't going to spend. And even I just think there's so many teams I would put ahead of the Red Sox, especially in the National League. Like I'm just saying, I don't think they're a player or a pitcher away from being a World Series champion, knocking off the Dodgers, Padres, the Phillies. Like I would count 4 or 5 teams in the National League before I even think of the American League in terms of World Series contenders. And to give Blake Snell that length of a contract would be like when the Rangers gave Jacob deGrom the 5 years. It's stupid. Like, it's not going to work out. And again, in a lineup that is still so young with guys like Wilyer Abreu, and I'm forgetting some of the other guys as well, Citadine Rafaela, you have Jaron Duran, but like one power bat isn't going to take this team over the hump even in the AL East. So I don't agree with that. There's been talks about now that, Snell, Freed, Burns, like their pitching staff is so mid anyways. Like one pitcher isn't going to change that for this team.
Yeah, when your best starting pitcher is Tanner Houck, he's not really a strikeout guy, and then you have other players like Cutter Crawford who throws meatballs like every other pitch, it seems.
Dude, that
Uh,
Otani home run against Cutter Crawford
yeah,
that
like
went into the playground. Like,
it's insane. Like, I don't know. I don't see a world where uh like the Red Sox can make all the moves, but I don't really see a move where they really get out of this kind of funk that they're in, where it's like I don't get it where they're always the one that's projected to spend so much money when they
I,
haven't done that.
I don't get like look, obviously Brian Bayo, they gave him that really nice contract. He was horrible this last year, of above 4 ERA, a whip at 1.35. But Yoshida was not great. Trevor Story is constantly injured. Rafael Devers is the only bright spot. David Hamilton's a speedster, but you're really not trusting him to lay a big bat. He had a 697 OPS. I just I don't see how, they're talking about Garrett Crochet possibly being a fit. Like, even if you inserted Corbin Burns or Max Fried into this rotation, obviously everyone takes a step down. I still don't like Tanner Houck, Brian Bayo, or Lucas Giolito as my two starter in a postseason. Like, objectively speaking, you go 1, 2, 3. Corbin Burns probably overtakes your game one, the opponent's game one starter, depending on the team. Game 2 and 3, like, what are you doing? Like, there's no way you're telling me. I don't know. You could even look at the Yankees, although their offense wasn't that great. Garrett Cole versus Corbin Burns, that's a toss-up. Then you look at game two, Carlos Rodon or Brian Bayo. And I know Rodon got lit up by the Dodgers, but they were just great against left-handed pitching throughout the entire year. But you're still going to take Rodon, and you're still going to take a guy like Luis Heel, who will now be a polished starter, or even a guy like Clark Schmidt. So I just don't understand the obsession with the Red Sox. Like, I get new ownership, but again, like, you're not a team like the Padres or the Diamondbacks, for instance, or even a team like the Baltimore Orioles that's like one piece away from getting over the hump, or even the Royals for that matter.
Yeah, I just don't get the obsession with the Red Sox. I know they're supposed to be one of the storied teams, one of the storied franchises, and everyone wants them to spend money to, get back to glory, but I just don't see it. One last player that I thought was really interesting is they have Alex Bregman remaining with the Astros, and I just don't think that's happening at all. And they say him having a 5-year deal with a 26 million club option for 2030. I don't see Alex Bregman re-signing with the Astros at all. I think we especially seen it after they lost to the Tigers, where he tweeted, "Thanks for everything, Astros fans." Like,
Hmm.
I think he already has a foot out the door, and he's already just determining what length of a contract he wants with any other suitors, because there's going to be a lot of suitors for him.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, like I really don't know, what the game plan is for this Houston Astros team. So obviously you have Yordan Alvarez under contract for these next 4 years. They bought out his arbitration years, just hit him with a 6-year, $115 million contract. I mean, you have Kyle Tucker, you have all these guys, but it's just like Alex Bregman, ideally he should stay with the Houston Astros just because that left field batter, like that left field Crawford box, I think is what it's called, has really benefited him during his time in Houston. But like Kyle Tucker's a UFA after this year. He still has that 1 year left of arbitration, and you're going to have to pay him. He's going to be 29 years old. And if you don't think Kyle Tucker is getting a $200 million contract, or at least somewhere in that ballpark, like the Houston Astros are going to do everything in their power to make sure that they have Kyle Tucker in an Astros uniform for the rest of his career, and he absolutely deserves that right. I think with the Astros, they got to spend more on pitching because Yusei Kikuchi's a free agent. Justin Verlander, I don't think they should bring him back. If you want to bring him back as a coach, by all means, I don't think you should take a foot on the mound again. They have so many injuries when you talk about Jose Urquidy. Obviously, Hunter Brown is a bright spot, but they've dealt with so many injuries this season that with so many pitchers on the market, I think they got to detour and spend the money there because they're starting pitching outside of Valdez and Brown. And they had Spencer Arrighetti as well, who had his moments, but at the same time was a high walk pitcher. You gotta power in some more notable arms because Arrighetti and Kikuchi weren't even used in the postseason.
Yeah. And seeing as how the article also says they predict Kikuchi going somewhere else, and I think he's going to leave somewhere too. Um, I just think it's really interesting to see what the Astros do
Hmm.
moving forward. And Scott Boras recently put out that Alex Bregman is willing to move to second base, and
Oh.
I I don't see it at all. And
It's not
and
like the market's any better for value wise for second baseman.
yeah, and they had talked about it earlier this year too when Alex Bregman missed some time and was on the IL. They had him originally, they were going to plan to move him to first base for a bit in case his arm couldn't get back to proper throwing strength in time, but he never actually ended up playing first base at all this year.
Hmm.
But I just think it's so weird how they've been trying to, put him in different spots, and Boris says he can move to second base and he can do this and he can do that. I just don't really see it. I think if a team signs Alex Bregman, they're signing him to be their third baseman, and I don't see any reason why Boris wants to move him from that position because third baseman is a really highly coveted position, and second
Yeah.
baseman isn't that coveted at all. So
Yeah,
I don't
you'd be
know.
killing market value.
Yeah, I don't know what's with Boris trying to say, oh, he can play second too. It's like, okay, I want
Hmm.
him as a third baseman.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. Based on the vibes of Minute Maid Park, it seems like Alex Bregman is gone. And I think he would go. I think he fits perfectly with the Yankees now that Gleyber Torres is most likely leaving. Alex Verdugo is probably going to leave. You can move Jazz back to the outfield. You could, and he doesn't have to play third base anymore. I think him going to the Yankees, even if they sign Soto, like it's the Yankees, they have so much money that I just think he would fit perfectly with that team, and you could get everyone back to their normal position. And Gleyber Torres could say, "I'm going to go play second base somewhere else."
Yeah. Um, Moving on, we could discuss who do we believe the first domino to fall in free agency would be. And or I guess you'll start with it because I originally thought Juan Soto was going to be that domino. But we talked about before we did this episode what, and you said you had someone else in mind.
Yeah, I look. I mean, I love free agency honestly more than the regular season, just because it's so much fun to figure, where everyone's going. I think Pete Alonso's the first domino to fall, and I thought he was going back to the Mariners, but now or I thought, I'm sorry, not back to the Mariners. I thought he was going to the Mariners. Now I think he's going back to the Mets. Like I I just don't see, obviously he had a really underwhelming year last year, but this is still a guy that can hit 40 home runs, entering into what would be like his age 31, 32 season can deter teams from wanting to sign him to a long-term big ticket. But going on Twitter and listening to what all these MLB insiders have to say, it's the growing impression that I've been getting is that no team really values Pete Alonso more than the Mets do. And I think that's also just more from a culture and locker room perspective. And so I do think Pete Alonso is the first domino to fall just because I think the longer the Mets wait and the longer Pete Alonso waits, we could be heading towards that Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell situation where Alonso maybe thought he was going to get, call it like a 4 year, $110 million deal that then turns into a 2 year, 40 million or $50 million deal with a player option, the Boris type of deal. So I think Pete Alonso's the first to fall just because he's never been in this position in free agency. And I don't think he wants to leave the city of New York in the Mets.
Yeah, and you see how good he's been for the Mets, and he's basically the heart of their franchise. Like Francisco Lindor is the face of it right now with the amount of success that he's had over the past year.
Hmm.
But I think Pete Alonso is the heart of that franchise, and a lot of the New
Hmm.
Yorker fans love Pete Alonso. You just go over, you look on Twitter, and you see because they obviously the New York market is a lot of white men, and they
Yeah.
relate to the big white man,
Yeah,
the
the
big
big
polar
polar
bear.
bear.
Yeah, and they relate to that, and Pete Alonso has been immensely successful in New York, and
Hmm.
I don't think he wants to mess that up. And I do think there are other suitors. There are a lot of teams that need a first baseman, especially one of Pete Alonso's caliber, power hitting, and somebody that if you can put people on base in front of him, he can score them in. He's third in RBIs,
Hmm.
with 431 since start of 2021.
Hmm.
He's he's capable of driving in runners, and he can hit that he can hit cleanup, and he can hit third. Um, he's somebody that every team probably wants this year or for the foreseeable future. Only
Hmm.
30 years old. You could sign him to, like you said, like a 4 year deal. And you could still get the most out of him because third or first basemen don't really age that poorly,
Hmm.
especially ones of Pete Alonso's caliber that are so power heavy and driving a lot of runs. You're not really worried about defense as much. But Pete Alonso is somebody I think we talked about before. I said there's a chance that he could go to the Nationals just because of the glaring spot they have at first base.
Hmm.
And you kind of alluded to it with your slip up and said the Mariners would
Yeah.
use somebody like him.
You have to
But
call me out.
but yeah, I think Pete Alonso stays in New York. And the reason why is because I think even if the Mets were to get Juan Soto, I think Pete Alonso would take a bit of a discount even. I
Yeah.
think being another a Boris client also is something that could help where they see it as an opportunity that they can win and have success together. And a 4 years that you $25 million per year deal, 4 years, 100 million would still be a really good contract for a first baseman.
Yeah, I think my only like the only pushback on that would be like Pete Alonso's never really gotten that big ticket contract just because of like avoiding arbitration and all that. And like personally, if I'm Pete Alonso, I would be kind of selfish to the extent of like I'm not taking less money just so some guy that's never put on a Mets uniform before can get his 680 million, and instead of me getting 130 million I'm taking 100 million. Like I don't think he would do that just because he's meant too much to the city of New York, and I think it would kind of be a slap in the face for Pete Alonso. But I could see maybe that happens. I just like I don't see it being like this egregious pay cut just because I mean, look, obviously he's made 44 million in career earnings, but when you take in New York taxes and paying your agent, that 44 million becomes roughly 20 million, which is still good money. But if I'm Pete Alonso, like this is my last chance at a big ticket. I gotta I gotta play selfish a little bit, and I wouldn't take that much of a pay cut, even if it means bringing in probably a top five hitter of all time.
Fair enough. So you think Pete Alonso? I said Juan Soto would be my first domino to fall, basically just because I think everyone in free agency is going to wait to see,
Hmm.
not basically similar to an Otani situation where a lot of players don't sign with other teams until they see the big fish, kind of set the market.
Hmm.
Um, and I think Juan Soto is going to be that guy once again, 26-year-old, probably projected to get around $600 million this in this free agency. And he's gonna get a lot of money and there's gonna be a lot of suitors for him. they Jeff Passan recently tweeted about the four teams that had a meeting with Soto recently.
Yeah.
The Blue Jays, Red Sox, Mets, and Yankees in that order of like teams that he met with. That's something really interesting where are the Blue Jays once again used as leverage in this situation to raise the price? I feel like it's interesting to see that he had the three teams ahead of the Yankees. I feel like he's trying to see which team gives him the most amount of money first, and
Yeah.
then brings that offer to the Yankees and says, "Would you match it?" Or like, how would you match it in terms of would you reach 700 million over 14 years or 700 million over 12 or 600 million over whatever?
Yeah, and I we see that all the time happen where, out of respect for the Yankees, they're going to get the final word most likely. I don't think many other teams are really going to be after Soto just because they can't really afford to pay him. So it's definitely not uncommon what he's doing.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's fair to the team that, you just had so much success with. Um, and 41 home runs in the past year, 109 RBIs. He was really big for the Yankees and, sent them to the World Series in that in 10th inning against the Guardians. I think it's I think it's really likely he just goes to New York to the New York Mets and not the Yankees because I think they're going to have the most money to offer him, and I don't think the Yankees are going to want to pay Juan Soto over the amount that Aaron Judge is already getting paid, especially like they have kind of a pride situation to them where
Like, look, they didn't want to do it with Yamamoto,
Yamamoto.
and look what happened. Yamamoto threw six and a third scoreless and dominated them. So, you know what? Maybe forget the pride for a little bit because look where it got you a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and Juan Soto was their best hitter in the postseason. I mean, you could have an argument for Giancarlo Stanton and
But
his
like
clutch hits, but like
contact and all that.
contact, getting on base, Juan Soto was always there for the Yankees, and
Hmm.
you saw how much Aaron Judge shrank in the postseason again. But it's
Hmm.
just like, does Juan Soto get that, big contract from the Yankees? Will they match the Mets? And I would like to think they do, but I think Juan Soto still ends up signing with the Mets. I think it just makes too much sense.
Yeah, I agree.
One team we could talk about, or I guess I'll ask you, because I already kind of went with my team, the Nationals. What team do you think makes a surprising move in the offseason? Like whether that be a trade or something that, a younger team just does to kind of propel themselves forward.
Call me crazy. I think so. I'm under the firm belief that the Detroit Tigers, I know it's a small market team, but I just think you can build off this year. Like, although, it's like a team got hot, but it's like they'd been hot for a while and they showed that in the postseason. I mean, they took the Guardians to the brink of elimination, and if it wasn't for one mistake pitch by Tarek Skubal, they could have been in the ALCS. I think the Tigers muster up some of their prospects and trade for Devin Williams to make that bullpen just even more filthy. And I don't think they stop there. I think they bring back Jack Flaherty as well. Just so now you have Scooble and Flaherty again. You could see how much Flaherty was supporting the Tigers, maybe a little too much, but it was supporting the Tigers even during their playoff run. And I also think they get a guy like Anthony Santander, which Comerica Park does suck for a guy like Santander because it's double central and he's not the biggest guy when you go straight away center, but he's also a pull hitter. So he has that to his advantage. I just think the Tigers say, you know what? Like, we're in a division that's completely up for grabs. Scooble is unanimously going to win the Cy Young. If anyone doesn't vote for Scooble, I don't know what you're doing. But you're still in a toss-up division to some respect, even with teams like the Royals and the Guardians ahead of you. But Devin Williams, I'll start with him first, just quickly. I know I'll go quick on this, but their bullpen, I think the Tigers bullpen is a top five bullpen in baseball. I think it's so underrated. Will Vest, Brennan Hanafy, Ty Madden. You also have Holton as well. You look like you could bring back Holton. Reese Olson, I think, should move to be like that bulk innings, like 1 to 2 guy. As a starter, he was kind of whatever, but I look at this team and you think you bring back Flaherty, you could bring in Santander. Obviously, it's a crowded outfield, but forget that. Like Wencel Perez move to DH or play be the fourth outfielder, but then you have Riley Green, Parker Meadows, and Santander in the outfield. And this is just my dream because I love the Tigers so much now. Those three outfielders can all hit home runs, and they're all really dangerous at the plate. Like you can't pitch around these guys.
Yeah, and having them all together would be like the dream outfield for them, just because, like you said, Parker Meadows popped off this year and really broke out as the future of this Tigers team. Riley Green has obviously been the best player on the Tigers for the past couple years, and they're still both really young. Riley
Mhm.
Green's turning 24, Parker Meadows is 24. Um, they have these young players, and you need a fourth or a third outfielder that can really, drive in runs. And if they can bring someone in like Santander, they could really start, building towards something. And obviously, a lot of this also predicates on someone like T Spencer Torkelson having a much better year than he had this year. If he could
Yeah.
kind of replicate what he did in 2023, hitting 30 home runs, if he can just be that power first baseman for them, they
Hmm.
have a real good shot of, like you said, running with this division because other than the Guardians, I don't really believe in any of the other teams. The Twins can't stay healthy to save their lives. The Royals, like we said, their lineup can kind of fall apart at times. And we'd seen it with Vinny Pasquantino. When they lose one of those top key bats, they can just go on a super huge losing skid, and they did that near the end of the season. So when we look at the Tigers, those gritty takes can just add someone to their lineup like Santander. They could really make a push for the division lead or for the division.
Yeah, and I think like you look at a guy like Wencel Perez, who only 25 years old, uh, but he didn't have the best season last year. Again, first year in the major leagues. I think he would really benefit from being the fourth outfielder because although at bats are important, I think it's just even more important to learn from a guy like Santander who mashed over 40 home runs, and at least for Perez it like he didn't play every day anyways in the major leagues, but I think it's just a better transition process for him. And I don't know what the market's going to be like for Santander just given his age and attrition. But if I'm the Tigers, like why not just throw out like a 2-year, $50 million contract? Like I don't see Santander getting a long-term commitment from a team just based on how old he is, but a team like the Tigers, like these young and up and coming teams, I think could really benefit. Oh, I'm so mistaken. Santander is 30 years old. I thought he was like 34. Never mind. Forget what I said about the 2-year deal. We'll edit
Mhm.
that out. But
Mhm.
I still think a team like the Tigers, because with Santander, so I just thought he was older. He fits their timeline to some respect where you want a veteran, but you don't want a veteran that's like 35 when the team average age is like 26. Like he can at least be that leader while also performing.
Yeah, and it really makes sense for them to do something like that just because like you said, they haven't really done much. They don't really pay that much money. Like you said, they're a small market team. And a lot of the teams in the AL Central are like, there's no one that's really going to be spending a lot of money. But if
Hmm.
you can kind of break that mold and you can kind of, you know, set something ablaze in the free agency market and add these
Hmm.
players like a Santander, even someone like the in the Bleacher Report article, they predicted Luis Severino
Hmm.
going to the Tigers. If you can
Hmm.
get some better rotational depth,
Hmm.
someone like a Santander, a power hitter who can play in your outfield, you have something really good going on where, like we said, they could run the AL Central.
Hmm. And they also have Jackson Jobe that's going to be up and coming, will
Yeah,
probably be, their fourth or fifth starter. And that's not a bad option to have, given that he already got some reps under his belt during the postseason.
yeah. It just makes too much sense, and I think the Tigers make sense as that team that could really surprise people. And they're
Hmm.
a young and upcoming team, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do try and spend money to try and bolster themselves. They did it coming into this year. They spent money on Kenta Maeda, who was a bust for them. They gave that 1 year deal to Jack Flaherty to kind of help him rebuild his value, and it worked.
Yeah,
Um,
we fell
they
for the trap.
Yeah, they've been willing to spend money, but in shorter bursts. I think this is the offseason where they see we did really good to end last year and we almost beat the Guardians. We swept the Astros. Like
Hmm.
I think this is where management looks at this team and says, we're not that far off. I don't think we're contenders yet, but if we can add pieces, we can eventually develop and become, you know, real contenders.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, I would agree that they're not contenders, but I would be scared to face them in the playoffs, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
they could easily take over a series like we saw against the Astros, but I still wouldn't put them in my top 6 or 7 teams, but I'd put them in my top 5 in terms of teams I wouldn't want to play.
Yeah, the amount of depth they have, their bullpen,
Hmm.
adding someone else in that lineup that's really scary would make them immensely scary to face at any given point, especially in the playoffs.
Hmm.
Um, Last thing we'll discuss of this episode will be some of the players that are on the trade block. Um, One of the players that you had brought up already was Devin Williams, and what happens with him, and you predicted him potentially being traded to the Tigers. Another player is Alec Bohm, and somebody who's had a lot of ups and downs throughout his tenure in Philly.
Hmm.
Um, where do you think he ends up?
I think he stays in the National League, and I think he goes to the Milwaukee Brewers because I think the Brewers are going to lose Willy Adames to free agency. Then you have your shortstop of the future in Joey Ortiz, and then you bring in Alec Boehm to play third base. I think it's a perfect fit for Boehm and for the Brewers. We see how the Brewers have been able to develop their talent, specifically with hitters. I'm looking at guys like Sal Frelick, Garrett Mitchell, as well as Joey Ortiz. We just saw how Jackson Chorio uh, in any year that Paul Skeens and Jackson Merrill aren't rookies, Jackson Chorio wins Rookie of the Year. And I think people really slept on Chorio and how incredible his season was just because of how good Skeens and Merrill were. But Alec Boehm is only 28 years old. He's still got a lot left in him. I just think his mentals got to him in Philly, how aggressive the Philadelphia Phillies crowd can be. But I think it would just be a seamless fit for both sides, the Brewers and for Bohm. You get to be a part of a really nice lineup moving forward, and you also really don't have that extensive media pressure being in Milwaukee.
Yeah, it just seems like he's somebody who, Philly isn't for everyone, obviously. Like it's an intense place to play. They
Hmm.
really are passionate about all of their sports teams and, you know, sometimes it's too much for some people. Like it's not meant for everyone, and that's why some players like playing in smaller markets. And I think Alec Boehm is that kind of a guy where, you know, he is somebody that can really perform uh where it's not as, hostile, not as hectic. Philadelphia fans threw snowballs at Santa Claus. Like
Yeah.
they aren't the happiest bunch. And I think somebody like Alec Boehm would be perfect to end up in a place like a Milwaukee. I was thinking he ends up, funny enough, I had him actually being traded to the Tigers because the Tigers' third base situation is kind of iffy,
Hmm.
where they don't really have many people playing third base. They had Gio Urshela playing it
Oh,
majority of this year until he eventually got waived and went to the Braves. But that's a place where I think he could also stay relatively under the radar. And um, like we had brought up about Santander, he could kind of be a positive voice in the locker room. Um, Somebody who's been deep in a postseason, somebody
hmm.
who has performed in a postseason. I think it'd be something interesting to see where there is a shot he could end up in a smaller market just so he doesn't have to deal with as much.
Yeah, one quick I think if the Astros lose Bregman, I could totally see them also trying to go out and get a guy like Alec Boehm, just a cheaper option to fill third
Mhm.
base, a viable guy. You could put him in your 7, 8 spot in the lineup, 6, 7, 8 spot in the lineup, and it wouldn't really cost a lot to get him. I think that it would also make sense too.
Yeah, that's another fair situation, kind of a backup plan for if Bregman were to leave and go to another, you know, any other team.
Hmm.
But yeah, that'll just about do it for this episode of Breaking News Bears. I once again want to thank my co-host Evan Davis, and I once again want to thank you guys, the listeners, for listening to another episode of Breaking News Bears. And hopefully by the time next episode comes out, there'll be a lot more free agency deals rather than just Travis Darnold. Um, thank you again once for listening to another episode of Breaking News Bears.